don't have my glasses on. Let me tell you about the fat of the land.
Hot off of the heels of two classic electronic records that continued to morph the landscape of the scene of the 90s, Experience and Music for the Jilted Generation, the British trio The Prodigy decided to take advantage of a previously underutilized resource in their hands for their third outing, which changed the overall tone and aesthetic for the band from that point forward. Founding member Keith Flint dips his hands all throughout this record, and it's his aggro-tinged vocal edge and songwriting ideas that pulls seeds planted from those first two outings and morphs it into this tighter yet more abrasive final product. It pushed the band into a sound that was well tied to the ever more angsty decade they found themselves in, and made them a household name in the process. I'm talking about the angrier, but still very Prodigy album that is, The Fat of the Land.
Now, I may be speaking from a place of mild nostalgia here because this album is kind of ingrained in my psyche. I listened to this album a lot growing up, and it was a big shaper in my musical taste. But even as someone who's spent the last X amount of years really diving into music, both in this genre throughout his life and the musical landscape in general, I still see Fat of the Land as a bona fide classic. And I still think that even though I love the two records that came before it, this is the best thing the Prodigy have ever done. And it boils down to a few elements. One, the focus, the bigger focus on tighter song composition and songwriting, I feel like makes the flow of this record impeccably vacuum sealed. There is not a second wasted on here. Even the songs that feel like they go on forever, like Minefields and Iranian and Funky Shit, those songs still reach an end. You know, they still have an end that doesn't make you feel like you're yearning for more. They feel like they could go on forever, but they knew just when to pull it back and to close it off and move on to the next idea. You know, it's not to say I don't like a lot of the more elongated moments on Music for the Jilted Generation and Experience, but I feel like this record is when they finally got it down to a science. They got electronic music down to a science, and it helped that Keith contributed a lot more to this record. You know, I think that the inclusion of his vocals helped the band find a sort of concrete foundation.
Nice companion piece to Maxim's vocals, especially on Breathe, where they both kind of trade vocal lines.
That build-up on Smack My Bitch Up is classic Prodigy. It became something that they would try to mimic throughout their career post Fat of the Land. But also on shit like Diesel Power, that's such a great, smooth UK hip-hop cut. The instrumental on that is incredible. It's so fat and juicy. I love it.
I can even argue that Diesel Power melds with the trip-hop genre in its own kind of way with the way this production sounds.
And again, they don't lose their identity by having this more accessible approach to song composition and songwriting. You know, songs like Funky Shit and Serial Thriller feel very indebted to their earlier work. And like I said, songs like Naranian and Minefield still have that sense of infinite void, infinite, structure that was on those previous two records that made those records so good. This has a little bit of everything, and that's a big reason why I love it. You know, I feel like it's a very important record in electronic music. And I know the general consensus agreed at the time. I just feel like as time has gone on, people kind of lost sight of this record's greatness. To me personally, the people I talk to, they don't really listen to this record. Keith especially, his contribution. This is his first record that he really contributed to as far as the band is considered, and it shows. His very wild personality ups the energy on this record tenfold. There's a sense of thickness to this record that was present on the previous records, but it's just enhanced tenfold because of Keith's intensity, because of his aggro nature. While artists like Fatboy Slim were toying with that, but still keeping within the realms of big beat and keeping it smooth, the Prodigy were this whole other thing because of their really dense, jittery, jagged synth lines and vocal deliveries that are very aggro, and the sample work wasn't the same. On Music they were sampling Nirvana. On Here and on future records they're sampling the Breeders. Like on Firestarter there's a great Breeder sample on there. They're sampling the Beastie Boys. You know, they're doing samples that fit within the decade but don't feel dated. You know, I grew up with the Breeders' Last Splash, and it wasn't until later on in life that I realized that they were sampling SOS on Firestarter, 2 records I listened to an insurmountable amount of times growing up. I love both of those records very dearly. They are very near and dear to my heart because they helped shape my musical taste. But they do such a great job at blending their samples in with things that it just never clicked with me. It actually wasn't until Invaders Must Die came out and I realized that they sampled the Breeders again, then I was like, oh shit, this is actually the Breeders. That's amazing. This was like a bunch of British punkers just came in and made an electronic record, and I love it for that.
I mean, name another electronic group that covered L7 on their fucking record.
And I would argue that that is a big reason why this record had a weird influence on the electronic landscape in the late 90s. Everything got very thick, and while there were other bands around this time incorporating the style, I feel like the Fat of the Land was the pariah of that whole scene. You know, shit like Wipeout, I feel like would have not benefited from this group's contributions to the electronic scene because of what they did. You know, because of the sounds, the synth sounds they made very popular. You know what I mean? And again, maybe that's just me. And that's just me gushing and thinking too much about a record that I do really, really enjoy. But this record does have a heck of a legacy. You know, I feel like that you can still see its imprints on some incredibly derivative electronic acts nowadays, like Hadouken. You know, Hadouken basically are Diet the Prodigy, and especially in their early work, and you can see a huge love of this record on For the Masses. You know, and like I said, the Prodigy themselves were trying to chase this record's high for years, and I feel like the closest they got to reaching it was on Invaders Must Die, because they were doing things like sampling the Breeders again, and chasing those drops, and building things in a similar way. But this record was just a nice shift in soul for the electronic scene, and for the Prodigy's catalog in general. I'd say that this was like a link to the past of their catalog, which was up to that point just the first Zelda, you know. I feel like this was more tight, more refined, and still had a lot of different things going on to make it a very dynamic listen for as tightened as it was, you know. And again, and as far as tributes to this record go, outside of like homages and band's influence, I mean, people have covered songs from here. Firestarter was fucking huge, as was Smack My Bitch Up. You know, those were very Charlie's Angels core for a while, and I think that's a big reason as well as to why people started to kind of look down on this record as time went on, because a lot of the songs were used in very machismo and shitty properties, but separated from those, there's still some amazing elements to be seen in here, whether it be like the drone on Funky Shit, or that just relentless drum sample on Serial Thriller, or how great Funky Shit goes into Serial Thriller, which goes into Minefields. You know, this record transitions into everything so perfectly, and it works, you know. Yeah. Like I said, I love this record. I think it's a classic, and I think it's the best thing that Prodigy's ever done, and it might be my favorite, at least big beat, dance-style electronic record. Like, I know I like industrial and other genres of electronic music more than big beat, and I like other industrial and electronic records more than Fat of the Land, but I hold Fat of the Land to a higher regard. This is also one of my favorite albums of all time, you know, and I wanted to talk about it on this segment. What do you think of Fat of the Land? Do you view it as a classic, as I do? Do you like the Prodigy? Do you think that they were very impactful to the electronic scene in the 90s? What's your favorite Prodigy record? If it's not Fat of the Land, let me know. Let's talk about the Prodigy in those comments down below. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Viral Rack. You guys take videos, slash situations, and I'll see you another day.